Welcome to the Chasing Poker Greatness YouTube channel. In today's episode of Tactical Tuesday, we're going to be looking at two hands played by Coach Brad himself. Let's get right into the action.
Look at this. Another wonderful 74 degrees in November Tactical Tuesday. How are you, John?
Doing good. It's a little colder here actually in Vegas, so I'm
That's
surprised
odd.
that it's yeah.
Yeah, it
You
feels
guys got
like
some good weather in Atlanta.
summertime in Atlanta, and today in today's episode we're gonna the world may be burning and in the midst of global just crazy hurricanes and weather patterns, but we're gonna look at some big pots that were played against some whales to distract us from our impending doom.
Yeah, despite the climate change, the whales are still doing okay. It seems like based on the way these two hands are gonna go. So
They
don't
just
worry
go
about
deep
them yet.
underneath the water, and the hurricanes don't affect them whatsoever. So let's go ahead and dive into this episode.
I think
So
I can guess who the whale is.
yeah. The one that is torturing everyone but me at this table. To give kind of a backstory, I remember looking at one point, and everybody at this table was stuck like 2K, except for me, who had ran up a $4,700 stack, and the whale, who had ran up a 5K stack. So, like, just essentially me and the whale were torturing everyone, and they couldn't beat either one of us. And then him and I go ahead and play the biggest pot I've ever played at 1K and 0. I've never played a bigger pot than this one.
Have you ever played a bigger pot than this online in terms of number of big blinds?
I don't know. I don't know. This is almost 1,000 big blind pot that ends up going down here, and with an ace and a five of different suits.
Yeah, it's even hard to get like 500 big blinds effective with someone at at least when you're playing no limit hold'em 6-max cash. Like even that alone is a rare occurrence, and then having both of those 500 effective players go all in somehow seems like something that almost sounds impossible to me. But
yeah, we have
we're gonna give it a try here.
Cooler situation developing with an ace and a five of different suits facing an under the gun limp. So I call big blind checks. I mean, look at the classic setup hand, right? King 10-3 rainbow with my ace and five. Flop checks through. So yeah, again, it's a limp pot. We're close to 500 big blinds deep. Somehow all the money's going to go in.
Yeah, one street has gotten checked through already. And
one street's gotten checked through, so there's 3 big blinds in the pot. So I bet pot on the turn, turning a gut shot. Just against this villain, had been like, I don't think there's anything he could do that would make me sad on the turn when I bet. If they both fold, okay. If they raise, I'm fine, and if they click it, I felt really good facing a click.
How do you decide on your stab size here with ace five? Like, is there something that is making you lean towards full pot? Did you think about using smaller sizes, or
I don't know,
one big
honestly.
blind or
I can't recall. This hand was played like many months ago. If I had to guess, I would say that didn't want the big blind to raise me at a high frequency to shut out the whale would be like the only strategic reason I could see to bet pot, or why pot would be like better than half pot or whatever. So yeah, I'm not sure, but the whale
that's
goes
pretty
ahead
good
and
reason. Yeah, what you want is like something like to get heads up versus the whale somehow, even if it's like this. So like having the big blind just raise almost never because you bet pot, I think is that's a good reason. That's a good enough reason for sure.
And
What do you think about the raise? Like,
I have
is
no
that
earthly
meaningful at all?
idea.
I mean, as someone who's played against, someone who was in the session on the ground versus this guy, like, is this something that happens, or was this the first time you'd seen something like this?
I think it's the first time I've seen like the click on the turn. Again, it doesn't really stand out to me. The river action does though. There is like some meta with the river action. But yeah, this raise size, I don't know. I didn't really think too much into it other than like, oh wow, they probably have a good hand and I've got a gut shot and we're infinite deep. Please God, give me a 4 on the river. God listened. My prayers were answered.
Just have to ask. Yeah.
Just gin to 4. I check, and actually, I remember I was playing this session. I was kind of talking to myself, and I verbalized, "Now's the time to bet 10x." Like this specific villain had bet like 10x on the river 50 times. I mean, they were just crunching everybody with like their 10x. Like they were just on a heater, like a major heater. And I don't actually think any of the hands went to showdown when they bet 10x. Like, so
Wow.
they just like it's just gone through like every time they bet 10x. And I remember like verbalizing, "Now's the time to bet 10x on the river."
Do it again. Do it again.
And I get the clean $1,000 river bet. And so I guess this is this is the interesting decision point of jam or not to jam. But yeah, I'll get your thoughts before I give mine.
Yeah, I mean, like without knowing, without like that history of like, oh, this guy just uses the size pretty frequently on the river, I would have been really excited about the 4 on the river and been planning on check raising. Then I would have probably seen, almost 10x pot come out from the whale, and my next thought would be like, okay, I was gonna check, like I was planning on check raising, but like this might be like the one situation, like the one size that I don't check raise. Given that he's a whale, though, I think like I imagine that if I was even without the history, I still would have just been pretty happy to stick it in with ace 5 because who knows like what he decides to call it off with versus someone who's a little bit more like
Reasonable.
not as excited about not as thinking about a diplomatic way to say it, like not as excited about just sticking their whole stack in without the nuts in this situation, like then yeah, I might just be like, all right, this feels like a pretty tight check call with ace 5, but I can't imagine a hand that's not 5-6 or also ace 5 calling it off here after they 10x the river and I decide to jam anyways. But this guy sounds like the right customer even without he just uses the size all the time on the river history.
I think there is some reduction in 6-5 too, by the way. Like a strategic takeaway is at least, they click the turn. I don't know that they click the turn with 6-5. So I think there is some reduction when they raise the turn and then do this on the river. That they don't always raise their 6-5, I think on the turn. So there is some reduction in their nut straights just by them raising the turn, even if it's minimum, I think. And maybe especially if it's minimum, right? Like maybe their min raise is just like severely weighted towards like sets and 2-pair and like very, very strong hands on the turn, but not really their draw portion of their range. And that could have been a factor that went into like for me, this was slam dunk. I didn't really even think much about jamming the river. It was like, holy shit, here we go. Like we're finally I'm getting my shot.
It's gonna happen. 1,000 big blinds.
Yeah, I ripped, and I mean they called within like 2 or 3 seconds. Like, I mean it was quick enough to where like I held my breath until the pot shipped my way. Like it wasn't like they didn't like tank. It was like very quick. They called and
you didn't know that you weren't sure that you had won the pot.
Yeah, $9,500 pot goes my way, and there we go. They flop top set. So interestingly, like given how they play, I'm so much happier having my hand than their hand on the turn. In this exact situation, because like, man, the only way that like all the money goes in on the river is if my hand turns into a straight. So yeah, that's the biggest big blind pot that I played thus far this year. Close to 1,000 big blinds in a limp pot where a street got checked through, which is insane. Now, I was gonna say too, like ace 5 off is now like one of my most profitable hands, and like I'm pretty sure that I'm still winning from the small blind after this hand. Like this, like my small blind win rate is astronomical due to this 1-5 buy-in donation. They just raised pretty
incredible. Like for people who think that like poker is dead and high stakes is all just reg battles. This is like exhibit A. Like, hey man, there's still pretty decent action. Pretty good games going on at 1KNL, and people are just giving away 500 big blinds at a time.
Yeah, kind of takes a pretty crazy sequence of events for this to happen though. Like they they have to like beat all the regs at the table. I've got to beat all the regs at the table. We both have to build up stacks, and then we get like this kind of situation, which is
And then
super
and then the
rare.
massive cooler happens. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, hand number 2, a little bit more tactically interesting, not as big of a pot though. So again, we have a whale in the big blind, I believe, or the
Is it
small
the same
blind.
guy?
Sorry, I don't think so. It's not the same guy.
Okay.
They click 3-bet from the small blind. I can't remember the exact stats again. This was played, 4 or 5 months ago, but they click the small blind, and the big blind, who's a reg, cold 4-bets. I imagine that the small blind's a volatile whale who's just really getting in there. I remember in game thinking that the big blind could be getting a little bit out of line with their 4-bets. Like they're not 4-betting like purely linear, just 4-betting fairly wide to isolate the whale in position.
Yeah, given how small the whale's 3-bet is, I could totally see the big blind expanding their 4-bet range here to like once they're getting like a good price to ISO the whale, like because the 3-bet is so small, I could easily see the big blind, a reg and the big blind expanding their cold 4 range. I would totally be doing the same thing. Like it's such a great situation if you can 4-bet here, get rid of the cutoff, and just go heads up in position versus the whale, and having that happen as frequently as possible. Totally something that I'd be shooting for.
And there is an argument for 4-betting with king queen off. I opted to flat to play in position multi-way against just both villains. So we take a flop. And by the way, I guess another part of this too is I really wanted to play in position like 200 bigs deep against a small blind. Like that's something that I strive to do. Isolating myself against the big blind, not as interesting, not as
This
fun.
has got to be like one of the only times in your life you've done this, huh? Opened and then flatted the cold 4-bet instead of
I wouldn't say that. I have no
anything
idea.
else.
It's
You get
I played a lot of
right.
hands and I've done a lot of weird things. Like I was saying this to somebody the other day that like, studying poker theory is very, it's very clinical, right? It's very clean environment, a very sterile type of, oh, you do this and then this is your response. Like, and you're like clicking around GTO Wizard and then you like sit down and it is just mass fucking
And then
chaos everywhere.
The small blind just min 3-bets, and you're like, well, everything I worked on just goes out the door now.
Right.
Like,
No more sterile environment. This is just pure and utter chaos. We're like, or you like you open the button, the cutoff 3-bets, and then like the big blind cold calls a 3-bet. And you're like, well, okay, well now everything's crazy. So yeah, king queen 9, top pair with a gut shot. Not the best of boards, not the worst of boards. Both villains check. I think that the big blind could be range checking. That cold 4-bet, maybe. Actually, I'll let you go. Do you think
I think
they
so.
have?
Like, as the cold 4-better, this is like a type of board that I would be pretty sad to see, right? Assuming that he knows that you're a reg and he's, probably making some assumptions about what your flatting range looks like, especially if, everyone is aware that small blind is a whale and everyone is aware that everyone else is like just trying to play pots versus the small blind. Like these are the types of boards that I would be pretty terrified of if I had, aces, kings, like that type of hand. So like even the top of my cold 4 range is not really loving life in this situation. Do you think that you can start eliminating the top of the big blind's cold 4 range once he picks that pre-flop size at all? Like, are you reading into the cold 4 size?
I don't know. It's so hard to say, right? Like because the 3-bet was so small, it's so hard to say whether or not they're splitting based on their cold 4-bet size there. That I just don't have enough information. I can't say with confidence. But I think also like SPR being 2 makes it really easy for the big blind to just check range because like
For sure.
even if you flop a set, like flop gets checked through, you can easily get stacks in. There's no
Sure.
I opt to check back, given that I thought big blind could check range and is like super well protected. Ace queen, aces, kings, sets, etc. Turn is a flush completer, but both villains check, and so now, what are you thinking?
Feeling pretty good about having the best hand now, especially versus the small blind. I was feeling pretty good on the flop, but now that we see the big blind double check here, feeling much better about having the best hand and feeling good enough to start value betting here. I think there's lots of worse hands that, either player can call with, particularly all the like one heart hands, lots of pair plus draw. And like we said, it's not still wouldn't be like completely shocking for the big blind to have like, some hands that are even better than ours, but still think that there's enough reduction in those like ace queen plus type hands. Once he checks twice, I think a good amount of the time the big blind is just going to start betting the turn with those types of hands, and needs a little bit more protection once there's 3 hearts out there, and also can just start getting value from our range that has 1 heart or pair plus draw. That type of stuff can start value betting versus the small blind. So yeah, long story short, just gonna start betting here, probably something around like half pot to like 2/3 pot.
Yeah, I thought there was on the flop when the SPR is 2, I thought the big blind could check range. On the turn with the SPR 2, I didn't think they were checking range anymore. I think they definitely have bets.
Yeah.
And so there is some reduction in like the top of their range in this scenario, which made me feel, I was feeling pretty good on the turn with King Queen, honestly, about getting value. So I do end up betting exactly half, and small blind sadly folds and the big blind calls. So not the exact scenario that I thought would go down, but here we are. River's the 5 of diamonds. SPR's under 1 and villain checks.
Okay, so what do I think about the big blind's range now that he's checked the flop, checked the turn, and then check called half pot? A lot of hands that make sense to play that way would be like ace jack, jack 10, 10 9, queen 10, maybe even king queen himself, king jack. We're doing really, really well versus that range, and we can probably count on being perceived to have a whole bunch of bluffs once hearts brick on the river and the open ender also bricks on the river, or at least like the flop open ender. So leaning towards just going for thin value here with king queen without thinking about exactly how many worse combos are going to call. Feels like there are enough calls that the reg is going to find. I don't know how you're thinking.
What size?
I was just thinking about going all in. Wasn't thinking about any other size here.
Yeah, I don't think
that's pretty
like
big.
it feels weird to split, right?
Yeah.
Like to have like the nut flush and be like, oh, I'm gonna like not go all in for some reason. Like I think you're polarizing. You want to stay polar. You don't want to split. So I think I would only have one size here, and I did in fact go for thin value.
I think this is a really good thin value bet on the river. Like I think this is the type of thin value. I mean, like we're in like crazy land already with like the min 3 bet and cold calling the cold 4, or not cold, but like calling the cold 4 bet. So whatever, we're already kind of not in like a normal theory spot, or like not in the sterile environment like you said. But I think that this is like, these are like the types of thin value bets that I think even some of the better regs in like these 6-max games are not making. Like I see a lot of these types of hands getting checked back, and I think that I think this is like, these types of value bets are what differentiates a lot of the like top players in the 1K pool on Ignition from like just the good players or like the winning players is finding these types of spots. And yeah, and it's something that I like find myself coaching too, like very frequently, even in the Wolves, not just like the private coaching students that aren't in Wolves, but just like push yourself to value bet thinner. Realize that like, in order to value bet profitably, you only need to get called by 50% better or 50% worse hands. Like that means that you can lose quite frequently on the river. It's sort of the reverse lesson of like pot odds, right? Where it's like, dude, your bluff catchers only need to win a quarter of the time. So like you can lose here pretty frequently and still make profitable calls. Like you can lose here very frequently and still make profitable value bets. And I think of Reg as like the exact type of player that I would be, well, I guess Wales too, but like a thinking Reg is like exactly the type of player that you should be trying to make these thin value bets versus, because they're going to be the type of player that realizes, okay, like hearts bricked, like, open ender bricks. Oh, they might be like turning pairs into bluffs now on the river. And like they find like, the lighter calls or the actual hero calls that I think some of the weaker players are not going to find because they're just, they just look at the absolute value of their hand and they're like, how can I call here with pocket sevens? Like,
Regs are also going to be call inclined, right? They're gonna they're gonna
yeah.
try to find some narrative thread that enables them to call because they don't want to fold. Like they're gonna look for whatever reason it is to make a call if there's any possible way. Like they want a hero call.
Right. That's also my
they want to put
problem.
the
Is
cape on.
I sit there on the river and think, well, if he has exactly
Ace 10 with
hearts,
a 10 of
yeah.
hearts. Ace 10 with the ace of hearts.
Yeah.
So
use that against them. Yeah.
That's well said. And yeah, so I jammed. Can't remember if they tank called or whatever, and actually showed up with.
Ooh. Yeah, this is like exactly the type of right. It's like the reg is to call with 8-9 on the river. Like the reg has to be saying all the things that we kind of jokingly made fun of the regs for saying, but I'm sure I made tons of calls.
I'm not
like this
joking
too.
because I have said these same words in my head right before I make a dumbass hero call so many times. Like this is like an insight into like my spiral downward into making a terrible call are all of these thoughts that we're kind of projecting onto the reg.
Yeah. You just like look at the big blind and you're like, I think you're probably like me. And if you're like me, I know what you're going to tell yourself facing this jam on the river. You're just going to think about all the brick stuff and find some.
You're going to find the call
call
somehow.
with.
Like it's and I think the crux of the river value bet here is more so that, I could eliminate most of the better hands. Most of the better hands, there is some elimination just due to them not betting the turn, them not check jamming the turn. That check call in the turn is really pivotal as it relates to villain having better hands. And the 5 of diamonds is just a complete brick that doesn't improve anything. So I think that's like that's the thing where I'm like with ace queen on the turn, I think they might check jam. If they check, I think they probably check jam facing half pot. And then if they don't check jam, I think they bet. So I think that like a lot of those types of hands get removed, especially because of the whale, right? In the small blind. Like ace queen checks once, that's fine. Checks twice now on the 3 flush when the whale probably has a lot of offsuit hands, a lot of pair plus draw, a lot of hands they can get value from. Feels so unlikely to me that, just hand reading wise, just seems like they just don't have that many better hands. And I don't know what's going to call me that's worse, honestly, when I jam the river. I'm not exactly sure.
Just like never have better.
Right. But if they almost never have better, then I don't care. They'll find something to call me with, right? They'll say those magic words of like, well, if I fold this, I'm folding everything. And then they call with some hand that's like, wow, a 9 and an 8, huh? That's a hand. So yeah, that's today's episode. 2 hands versus some people that are putting lots of money in the pot pretty inappropriately.
Yeah, kind of questionable who the whale in this hand is, right? Is it actually the small blind or is it the big blind? I can't tell.
Or maybe it's a cutoff. Cold calling.
Maybe it's the guy who cold called the 4. Yeah, who just like calls the 4-bet.
We'll never know. Good luck proving it, by the way. All you solver wizards out there, good luck proving who the whale is, because it's gonna take a lot of node locking, a lot of computers running for a long time to figure out who the whale is. All right. I think that's all I have for this week's episode. By the way, if you've made it this far, subscribe because it's good for the soul. That's all I have.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks for watching today's episode of Tactical Tuesday. As always, if you enjoyed what you saw, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Helps us out a lot and lets us know what type of content you're looking to see in the future. Thanks again for watching today's episode of Tactical Tuesday.
This is Tactical Tuesday on Chasing Poker Greatness with your hosts, Brad Wilson and John Chai. Coach Brad approved. Are you a lone wolf searching for the ultimate pack? The CPG Wolf program is a close-knit brotherhood hell-bent on one thing only: chasing poker greatness. Powered by bleeding-edge wolf strats and led by Coach Brad and his lieutenants, CPG Wolves are systematically prepared for almost any spot they'll encounter on the green felt. If you want to plug into an elite team and have a step-by-step game plan to realize your full poker potential, you can apply at cpgwolves.com. Space is limited, and the pack is only as strong as its weakest member. So only the hungriest, grittiest, and most driven will be accepted into the program. Applications are open at cpgwolves.com.